Delaney slid the divorce papers across the table, lips curling like she had just delivered a brilliant joke. She waited for me to pale, to explode, to step right into her trap, but I didn't shake. I spotted the faint glow of the smart speaker in the corner, realizing the room was rigged for a meltdown. I picked up the pen and signed every page. Instantly, the one losing control was no longer the one holding the ink. My name is Aspen Ashmore. In my line of work, chaos is just a data point waiting to be categorized and filed. I am a senior auditor specializing in catastrophic loss for the Granite Vale Response Group. When a Category 4 hurricane flattens a coastal city, or when a wildfire eats through 50,000 acres of prime real estate, I am the person they send in when the smoke finally clears. My job is to walk through the utter devastation, look at millions of dollars in twisted metal, shattered glass, and burned wood, and remain entirely detached. I calculate the true cost of destruction. I find the baseline of ruin. Panic is a luxury I have never been able to afford, and emotional outbursts do not rebuild collapsed infrastructure. You learn very quickly to breathe evenly when everything around you is falling apart. That precise, clinical detachment is likely why my marriage to Delaney Cross appeared so flawlessly balanced to the outside world. We have been married for 8 years. We reside in a sprawling high-rise condominium overlooking the gray expanse of Lake Michigan in Chicago. We share the space with our rescue dog, a quiet golden mix named Clover. To the glittering, fast-paced society we navigate, we are the absolute pinnacle of modern, civilized success. We chose not to have children, pouring our energy instead into 2 thriving careers and a meticulously curated domestic life. Delaney is the Director of Development for the Harrow House Arts Initiative, a private and highly prestigious art fund. She is stunningly beautiful, effortlessly polite, and possesses a terrifying mastery over social dynamics. She knows exactly how to read a room, how to make the wealthiest donors feel uniquely important, and how to control the narrative of any conversation she enters. Where I am the quiet, unmovable anchor, she is the dazzling, performative sail. Over the past several months, the rhythm of our lives had fractured into 2 separate, incompatible beats. Mother Nature had been relentless, tearing across the Midwest with unseasonal hailstorms and severe flash floods. I was spending 3 weeks out of every month living in sterile hotel rooms, auditing disaster sites, and wrestling with aggressive insurance adjusters over corporate claims. I was exhausted, saturated in the logistics of loss. Delaney, conversely, was ascending further into her carefully constructed world. Her schedule morphed into a relentless carousel of donor dinners, exclusive charity galas, and late-night fundraising strategy sessions. And then there was the new name that began slipping into her daily updates with alarming frequency: Owen Kessler. He was supposedly a consultant hired by the Arts Fund. Someone brought in to maximize high-net-worth contributions. She spoke about him constantly, praising his vision, his connections, his brilliance. She always wrapped his name in the protective coating of professional admiration, but the sheer volume of his presence in our home was impossible to ignore. I noted it, filed it away in my mind, and went back to my spreadsheets. I believed in the structural integrity of the life we had built over 8 years. The evening she detonated our marriage started with a mundane precision that now feels almost insulting. It was a Tuesday night. I had just flown back from a brutal 4-day site visit in Nebraska. Delaney had cooked. We sat at our custom marble dining table, eating roasted garlic pasta and drinking a very expensive, very crisp white wine. Clover was asleep near the floor-to-ceiling windows, her paws twitching as she dreamed. We traded small, fragmented stories about our respective weeks. I explained a complex supply chain failure regarding commercial roofing materials. She complained about a caterer who had ruined a floral arrangement at a preview event. It was completely, aggressively normal. The temperature in the room was comfortable. The lighting was soft. Then, Delaney wiped the corner of her mouth with a heavy linen napkin. She stood up, her posture impossibly graceful, and walked over to the kitchen island drawer. She pulled out a thick, unmarked brown envelope and walked back to her seat. She placed it on the smooth stone surface and slid it across the table until it bumped gently against the base of my wine glass. I picked it up. I opened the flap and pulled out the thick stack of papers. It took my brain exactly 3 seconds to register what I was holding. It was a divorce settlement. But it was not a rough draft. It was not a generic template downloaded in a moment of frustration. It was a terrifyingly complete, legally airtight document. I scanned the pages, my eyes tracking the data with the same cold efficiency I use on a disaster site. It detailed the exact division of our condominium down to the last square foot of equity. It listed our shared retirement accounts with dollar amounts that were accurate up to the current week. It factored in my projected annual bonus from Granite Vale. It even contained a perfectly formatted clause outlining the primary custody arrangement for Clover, giving Delaney full control. It was a masterpiece of premeditation. Someone had spent dozens of hours and thousands of dollars preparing this ambush. I looked up from the pages. Delaney was smiling at me. It was not a warm smile, nor was it an angry one. It was a calculated, slightly condescending expression, like a teacher waiting for a slow student to grasp a simple concept. She tilted her head, letting her perfectly styled hair fall over one shoulder, and let out a soft, theatrical sigh. "It is just a joke, Aspen," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "A little prank to make you wake up. You have been so incredibly absorbed in your disasters lately. I felt I needed to do something drastic to get your attention. Consider it a wake-up call for our marriage. A physical representation of what you are neglecting." She spoke the words with flawless delivery, treating the legal dissolution of our life together as a clever prop for a modern marital drama. She was waiting for me to turn pale. She was waiting for me to explode. She wanted me to slam my hands on the table, to shout, to demand answers, to beg. She wanted me to do exactly what the trap required me to do. But I did not shake. I did not raise my voice. I kept my breathing entirely steady, drawing air into my lungs in slow, measured counts. As I held her gaze, my peripheral vision locked onto a tiny, glaring detail in the background. On the kitchen counter, tucked neatly next to the espresso machine, our smart speaker was sitting silently. The small circular light ring on its top edge was glowing a solid, unmistakable blue. It was active. It was recording. In a fraction of a second, the entire architecture of the evening made perfect sense. The pasta, the expensive wine, the beautifully typed document, the condescending smile. It was all a set. The room had been meticulously prepared to capture an explosive, aggressive reaction from a neglectful wife. Delaney wanted a chaotic, emotionally unhinged partner on tape to use as leverage in the real battle to come. But she fundamentally misunderstood the woman sitting across from her. She forgot that my entire professional existence is built on walking into a volatile, catastrophic situation and neutralizing it. I do not create noise. I silence it. I reached out and picked up the heavy silver pen resting near my dinner plate. I did not utter a single syllable. I opened the thick document to the first page. I read the clauses detailing the division of our assets. I signed my name on the first designated line. The scratch of the nib against the thick paper sounded deafening in the quiet room. I turned the page and signed the next. My handwriting was sharp, consistent, and completely devoid of tremors. I signed away my claim to the condominium. I signed away the investment portfolios we had built over 8 years. I initialed every single rider, every addendum, every perfectly typed paragraph designed to strip me down to nothing. The silence in the dining room grew heavy, thick, and suffocating. I did not look up, but I could feel the atmosphere warping. The person losing control of the narrative was no longer the one holding the pen. I could hear Delaney's breathing change, shifting from slow confidence to a rapid, shallow rhythm. Her carefully constructed smile was melting into a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. When I reached the final page, I executed my signature one last time. I slowly capped the silver pen. I squared the edges of the 20-page document, slid the stack neatly back into the brown envelope, and pushed it exactly to the center of the marble table. I folded my hands together and looked directly into Delaney's wide, panicked eyes. I kept my voice entirely flat, delivering the words with the cold precision of a final audit report. If this is a joke, Delaney, then signing this means absolutely nothing, and I lose nothing. But if it is not a joke, then you just got exactly what you prepared for. Morning light always feels harsher after a shift in reality. It was 7 in the morning when I walked into the kitchen to pour my first cup of coffee. The heavy brown envelope was gone from the marble island, wiped away as if the previous night was nothing more than a bad dream. But I do not deal in dreams. I deal in physical wreckage. Delaney was sitting at the breakfast nook. She had clearly been crying, the rims of her eyes a delicate, sympathetic shade of pink. Yet, her hair was brushed into a flawless, glossy wave, and she wore a perfectly pressed silk robe. It was the exact aesthetic of a woman who wanted to be perceived as broken but refused to look unattractive while doing it. She wrapped her hands around her ceramic mug, looking up at me through her lashes. "I did not sleep at all," she whispered, her voice carrying a fragile tremor. "Aspen, you have to understand. I just wanted you to pay attention to our marriage. I was desperate. I needed to shock you into seeing me again." I leaned against the counter, letting the dark coffee warm my hands. I did not match her emotional pitch. I did not raise my voice or offer comfort. Ashok is coming home with a radical haircut. Delaney, Ashok is booking a surprise flight to Paris. Having a lawyer draft a binding separation agreement is not a cry for attention. It is an execution plan. She flinched, a tiny tightening of the muscles around her jaw. It was just a stupid, dramatic gesture. I did not mean any of it. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The paperwork had our retirement balances calculated down to the exact dollar. It listed the precise square footage of this condominium and assigned a highly accurate current market value to it. It factored in my projected bonus for the third quarter. No one writes a document like that on a 10-minute whim. "So, who helped you prepare it?" Delaney looked away, her gaze fixing on the city skyline outside the window. "I do not know what you mean. I just used a template online." "Do not insult my intelligence," I said, my voice completely flat. "A generic template does not know the vesting schedule of my company shares." "Who helped you?" She swallowed hard, her knuckles turning white against her mug. "Just a friend who knows the process. They offered to show me what it would look like, just to scare you. That is all it was." I did not press her further. As an auditor, I know that when a subject begins to offer vague, defensive answers, the best tactic is to let them think they have successfully deflected the question. Silence makes liars sloppy. I nodded once, put my mug down, and walked down the hallway toward our shared home office. The room was quiet, smelling faintly of the expensive cedar candles Delaney loved to burn. I walked over to the sleek, high-end laser printer sitting on the credenza. The digital display was dark, but a gentle tap on the screen woke it up. I navigated through the menus with practiced efficiency, pulling up the recent print history. There it was, a document titled, with our last names and the word, dissolution. It was 24 pages long. It had been sent to the printer from Delaney's personal laptop exactly 2 days ago at 3 in the afternoon. She had not printed it in a fit of sudden evening rage. She had printed it on a bright Tuesday afternoon while I was hundreds of miles away, inspecting water damage in a collapsed warehouse. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the camera, and took a clear, high-resolution photograph of the printer screen. I made sure the timestamp and the document name were perfectly legible. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and walked out of the office, heading straight back to the kitchen. Delaney was still sitting at the nook, watching me with nervous, tracking eyes. I walked casually past her, heading straight for the small shelf where the smart speaker sat. I reached out, grabbed the thick power cord, and pulled it directly from the wall socket. The device went dead instantly. "What are you doing?" Delaney asked, her voice spiking with sudden, sharp panic. "The network is glitching," I lied, keeping my tone entirely casual. My phone could not connect to the home system. "I am just doing a hard reset on the router and the speakers." She relaxed slightly, but her shoulders remained tense. I walked into the living room, sat down on the leather sofa, and unlocked my phone. I did not open the network settings. I opened the proprietary application that controlled our smart home devices. I navigated past the lighting schedules and the thermostat controls, digging straight into the privacy and data logs. It took me less than 2 minutes to find what I was looking for. There, sitting in the cloud storage history, was an audio file. It was recorded the previous evening. The timestamp showed the recording had been manually triggered exactly 5 minutes before Delaney brought the brown envelope to the dining table. The duration of the file was 45 minutes. I stared at the screen, feeling a cold, heavy absolute settle into the pit of my stomach. The single detail locked the entire puzzle into place. Delaney had not presented those divorce papers to tease me. She had not done it to test my love or to wake up our romance. She had triggered a recording device and then handed me a heavily engineered legal threat. She was waiting to catch a violent, screaming fit of rage on tape. She needed audio of me losing my mind, hurling insults, perhaps sweeping the expensive wine glasses off the table. She needed me to sound dangerous and unstable. She needed it because she was building a case. I locked my phone screen. I did not confront her with the app. I walked back into the kitchen, my face giving away absolutely nothing. Delaney sensed the shift. She could feel that her narrative of being the neglected, desperate wife was failing to gain traction. So, she pivoted. She went on the offensive. "You see," she said, her voice rising, shedding the fragile victim act for a sharp, accusing tone. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You are completely made of ice, aspen. I hand you divorce papers. I tell you I am miserable. And you just walk around checking the printer and unplugging electronics. You do not yell. You do not cry. You do not even care." She stood up, pacing the length of the kitchen, her hands waving in the air. "You are not a wife. You are a machine. Living with you is like living with a financial report. Every emotion I have is just a liability you want to mitigate. I cannot breathe in this marriage anymore because you suck all the oxygen out of the room with your endless, suffocating efficiency." It was a good speech. If anyone else had been standing in the room, they would have felt profound sympathy for the beautiful, suffocated woman trapped with a heartless corporate drone. But I knew the truth now. I knew the speech was just another draft of the script she had written for herself. I stood in the center of the kitchen and let her words hit me. I did not defend myself. I did not tell her that my efficiency was the only reason we could afford the marble countertops she was currently leaning against. I did not tell her that my lack of screaming was the only reason her little audio recording from the night before was completely useless to her. "I hear you, Delaney," I said simply. My voice was calm, steady, and utterly void of the chaos she so desperately wanted to provoke. "I need to go to work." I turned my back on her, walked into our bedroom, and closed the door. I did not get dressed for the office. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up my company portal. I logged a request taking 1 full day off for personal reasons. Then, I opened a secure browser window and typed in the name Marisol Keene. She was one of the most ruthless, heavily recommended family law attorneys in the city of Chicago. I found her office number, picked up my phone, and dialed. As the line rang, I looked out the window at the morning traffic crawling along the lakefront. I made a silent, unbreakable promise to myself. From this exact second forward, I was no longer a participant in Delaney's emotional theater. There would be no more arguments. There would be no more pleading. From here on out, every single interaction, every dollar, and every movement would be handled strictly through hard, undeniable evidence. The time for tears was over. The audit had officially begun. When you spend your entire career dissecting the anatomy of a disaster, you develop a sixth sense for structural failure. You learn that a collapsed building never falls without warning. There are always microfractures in the foundation, hairline splits in the concrete, and subtle shifts in the load-bearing beams long before the roof actually caves in. Sitting in the quiet glow of my laptop screen, I decided to stop looking at my marriage as a romance that had tragically lost its way. I began to look at it as a fraudulent insurance claim. I opened our joint banking portal. I did not just look at the current balances. I downloaded the transaction history for the past 12 months and exported every single line item into a blank, unformatted spreadsheet. I applied a pivot table to our expenses, filtering out the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries, and the known variables. I was looking for the bleed. It took me nearly 3 hours of cross-referencing to find the anomaly. Tucked neatly between legitimate dry cleaning bills and premium dog food purchases, there were recurring outbound transfers. They were labeled with a bland, corporate moniker LK Advisory. The amounts were perfectly engineered to avoid triggering any internal alarms. $750 on a Tuesday, $1,100 the following month, $400 a few weeks after that. They were numbers small enough to vanish into the background noise of a high-income household, provided you were not looking directly at them on a continuous loop. I opened a secure browser and accessed the state business registry. It is entirely public information, but most people never think to look. I typed in the initials. After sorting through dozens of active and inactive entities, I found the match: Larkspur Key Limited Liability Company. It was incorporated exactly 9 months ago. I pulled the registration documents and checked the registered agent on file. It was a boutique wealth management firm located downtown. It was the precise firm Owen Kessler always pushed his top-tier donors to use when they wanted to shield their philanthropic assets from tax liabilities. The name Owen Kessler echoed in my mind, stripping away the polite veneer Delaney had painted over it. I thought back to the countless times she had casually woven his name into our evening conversations. She always presented him as a crucial partner, a necessary fixture in her ambitious fundraising goals. But now, looking at the screen, the memories shifted. I recalled the excessive familiarity in her tone. The way she knew he was allergic to shellfish, the way she mentioned his preference for single malt scotch. She had packaged an intimate affair as a professional necessity, hiding him in plain sight beneath the banner of work. I left the banking portal and accessed our shared cloud storage drive. We maintained a specific folder for our annual tax preparation, a place where we both uploaded our employment forms and investment summaries. I bypassed the main files and looked straight at the metadata. The system logs do not lie. I found a trail of digital footprints showing that Delaney had accessed and downloaded my restricted stock unit statements, my complete retirement portfolio history, and a recent comparative market analysis of our condominium. The timestamps on the downloads were damning. She had pulled all of my most sensitive financial data exactly 6 weeks before she ever pulled that envelope out of the kitchen drawer. Digging deeper into the drive, I found a subfolder she had carelessly neglected to clear. It contained digital receipts from a popular rideshare application, likely forwarded from her email by an automated rule. I cross-referenced the dates on the receipts with the calendar on my phone. She had told me she was attending a massive charity gala at the Modern Art Museum, claiming she would be exhausted and home well past midnight. The rideshare receipt for that specific night showed a pickup location that was nowhere near the museum. The car had picked her up from a luxury boutique hotel on the Gold Coast at 2 a.m. I closed the laptop. The betrayal was absolute, but I did not allow myself to drown in it. When I walked out of the home office and back into our shared living space, I was no longer a betrayed spouse. I was an undercover auditor. I poured myself a glass of water. I asked Delaney about a minor issue she was having with a vendor at work. I nodded sympathetically while she complained. I kept my breathing even and my expression perfectly pleasant. She visibly relaxed, her shoulders dropping. She truly believed her little trap was still hidden safely in the brush, waiting for me to step on it. The following afternoon, I arranged to meet Tessa Brody for coffee at a small, industrial cafe near her latest project site. Tessa is my oldest friend. She is a general contractor who spends her days managing unruly electrical crews and arguing with city inspectors over building codes. She possesses a fiercely practical, no-nonsense perspective on the world. I sat across from her at a scratched wooden table and laid out the facts. I did not cry into my latte. I simply gave her the data, chronologically and without embellishment. Tessa stopped stirring her coffee. She set the spoon down, her jaw tightening. She looked at me with a heavy, deeply apologetic expression. "I need to tell you something. Aspen," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "I saw them together. It was about 4 months ago. I was picking up a late takeout order from a spot in the West Loop. Delaney and Owen were sitting at a corner booth in the bar across the street. I only saw them through the window for a few seconds. But they were not talking about art grants." He had his hand resting on the back of her neck, right under her hairline. I convinced myself I was misreading the angle or that I was just exhausted. I did not want to blow up your life over a shadow in a bar. "I am so deeply sorry." "Do not apologize," I said quietly. "You just verified a timeline." Armed with the complete picture, I took my findings straight to the sleek, glass-walled office of Marisol Keene. Marisol is not a therapist. She is a legal tactician. She sat behind her massive mahogany desk, reviewing my printed spreadsheets with the cold, calculating eye of a seasoned predator. "This is not a sudden marital crisis," Marisol stated, tapping a manicured fingernail against the Larkspur key documentation. "This is a meticulously orchestrated withdrawal. She is not acting out of spontaneous emotion. She is staging a financial and emotional exit, step by step. She is trying to secure her capital while simultaneously manufacturing a narrative where you are the aggressive, uncooperative villain." Marisol leaned forward, clasping her hands together. "We need to trace every single dollar she has moved into that shell company, and we need to map out every hidden expense. I recommend we bring in an outside specialist." By 3 o'clock that same afternoon, I had formally retained the services of Victor Sloan. Victor is a forensic accountant. He is a man who hunts hidden money for a living, taking digital illusions and turning them back into hard, undeniable numbers. I handed him an encrypted flash drive containing every single anomaly I had pulled from our accounts. Walking out of Victor's office and stepping onto the bustling Chicago pavement, I took a deep, freezing breath of city air. For the first time in months, the crushing, suffocating weight in my chest began to lift. The blind, disorienting agony of a broken heart was entirely gone. In its place, I felt something far more dangerous. I felt the cold, hard steel of a definitive direction. In the modern arena of destroyed relationships, the person who speaks first is the one who owns the truth. Delaney understood this rule with terrifying clarity. She did not just want to leave the marriage. She wanted to curate her exit like a museum exhibition. 3 days after the dinner, the first strike landed not in a courtroom, but in the digital sphere. It happened on a Thursday evening. I was sitting at the kitchen island, reviewing a structural damage report for a commercial property, when my phone screen illuminated with a notification, then another, then a steady, relentless stream of vibrations. I opened the application and found a sprawling, meticulously crafted essay posted to Delaney's primary social media account. It read less like a personal update and more like a polished editorial for a high-end lifestyle magazine. She wrote eloquently about the heavy, invisible burden of isolation. She described the profound agony of living in a home that felt like a beautifully decorated vacuum. She used phrases like choosing peace, protecting my inner light, and walking away from years of silent neglect. The prose was breathtakingly manipulative. She never once typed my name. She did not have to. In the tight, affluent circles of Chicago arts and philanthropy, every single person reading that post knew exactly who the invisible, neglecting villain was. The social fallout was immediate and suffocating. Text messages began trickling in from mutual acquaintances and people I considered friends. Their words were carefully chosen, heavily guarded, and deeply revealing. "Hey Aspen, just checking in. Sending you both healing thoughts during this difficult transition. Let me know if you need to talk. Aspen, we are here for both of you." They were not outright accusations, but the underlying hesitation was impossible to miss. They were tiptoeing around me like I was an unpredictable hazard. Delaney had successfully established the perimeter of the narrative. By painting herself as the quiet, long-suffering victim who had finally found the courage to escape. She forced everyone else into a position of sympathetic defense. If I spoke up to defend myself, I would look defensive and aggressive. If I stayed quiet, my silence would be interpreted as guilt. It was a flawlessly executed social checkmate. But the public performance was only the surface layer of the strategy. The real poison was being injected through the legal system. Early Friday morning. My phone rang. It was Marisol. Her voice was devoid of pleasantries, dropping straight into the tactical reality of the situation. "She has officially filed the initial motions," Marisol stated, the sound of rustling paper echoing through the receiver. "And she is going for the throat right out of the gate. Delaney has petitioned the court for temporary and exclusive use and possession of the condominium. She is also requesting an emergency order for short-term spousal support." I stared at the city skyline outside my window, processing the sheer audacity of the request. She wants me out of my own home, and she wants me to fund her exit. "Precisely," Marisol replied. "Her legal counsel is framing this as an urgent necessity." The petition paints a picture of a woman who has been systematically cut off from emotional and financial partnership. She is claiming that your frequent work travel and supposed refusal to engage in the marriage have left her in a state of severe distress, making it impossible for her to secure independent housing on short notice. The hypocrisy was so dense it was almost physical. Delaney was actively funneling thousands of dollars into a hidden limited liability company, touring fully furnished rental apartments with her secret partner, and yet she was holding out her hands to the court, playing the role of the destitute, abandoned wife. "There is something else," Marisol continued, her tone dropping into a lower, more dangerous register. During the initial exchange of preliminary disclosures, my paralegal caught a metadata error on a file sent over by her attorney. It was a background memo, an internal document drafted by Delaney and her legal team to build her case profile. It is dated nearly 5 months ago. "Read it to me," I said. Marisol paused, likely scanning the text. "It is a character assessment. Delaney describes you as a deeply repressed individual. She claims you possess a chilling capacity for emotional detachment. But the key phrase here is that she describes you as highly volatile beneath the surface, quote, prone to sudden, terrifying coldness, and highly capable of exploding when cornered, unquote." I closed my eyes, leaning my forehead against the cool glass of the window. The fiction she was weaving was a masterpiece of projection. The reality of my life stood in direct, undeniable opposition to her words. I do not have a history of violence. I have never thrown an object in anger. There are 0 police reports bearing my name. We have shared walls with our neighbors for 8 years, and not one of them has ever heard a single raised voice from our unit. My closest friends know me as the woman who handles catastrophic, multi-million-dollar disaster zones without shedding a tear or raising my pulse. Delaney was not just lying. She was retroactively attempting to rewrite my fundamental personality to justify the brutal legal strategy she was unleashing. She needed me to be a monster so her departure would look like a rescue mission instead of a calculated robbery. That night, the quiet of the condominium felt heavier than usual. I walked into the guest bedroom, which I had converted into a makeshift office, and locked the door. I put on a pair of high-fidelity, noise-canceling headphones. I opened the encrypted folder on my laptop and clicked on the audio file I had extracted from the smart speaker on the morning after the divorce papers were served. I had previously only checked the timestamp and the duration to confirm its existence. Now, I needed to hear the trap being set. I turned the volume up to maximum and pressed play. The recording began with a soft rustling sound, fabric brushing against a hard surface. The kitchen microphone was incredibly sensitive. I could hear the faint, rhythmic hum of the refrigerator. I heard the clinking of heavy ceramic plates being set on the marble island. Then, I heard the sound of Delaney clearing her throat. There were a few seconds of dead air. And then, cutting through the silence, came a voice. It was not the polished, weeping voice she used with her friends, nor the sharp, defensive tone she used with me. It was a low, breathless whisper, spoken directly toward the device. "Just keep recording. as long as it does not cut out in the middle. The audio file continued, capturing the sound of my footsteps entering the kitchen a minute later, capturing the mundane conversation about pasta and work, capturing the exact moment the heavy paper envelope slid across the table. But I stopped listening. I paused the track and pulled the headphones off my ears. The blood roared in my head. That single, whispered sentence changed the entire molecular structure of the divorce. I understood the architecture of the trap with absolute clarity. The dinner was never intended to be a conversation about ending a marriage. It was a fully funded production set. Delaney needed an explosive, unhinged reaction from me to validate the fictional character assessment she had given her lawyers 5 months prior. If I had screamed, if I had swept the wine glasses onto the floor, if I had uttered a single threat, she would have taken that file straight to a judge. She would have used my manufactured rage to secure the condominium, the financial support, and the absolute destruction of my reputation. I picked up my phone and called Marisol. It was late, but she answered on the second ring. I told her exactly what I had just heard. "Send me that file immediately," Marisol ordered, the thrill of a fatal strike evident in her voice. "We can use this to absolutely incinerate her request for temporary support. We can submit the audio to the judge tomorrow and expose the entire setup." "No," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of warmth. Marisol went silent for a moment. "Aspen, this is a silver bullet. Why would we hold it? Because if we shoot now, we only hit her arm," I explained, staring at the blank wall of the guest room. "She is building a story. She is telling everyone how scared she is. She is telling the court how vulnerable she is. If we show the evidence now, she will pivot. She will claim she was terrified and felt she had to record me for her own safety. We do not stop her performance. Marisol. We buy her a bigger stage." I instructed Marisol to file a standard, bureaucratic objection to the temporary support, offering no explosive counterclaims. We would remain completely silent regarding the limited liability company, the secret rental apartment, and the audio recording. We were going to let Delaney believe her trap was still functional. We were going to let her smile at her friends, post her beautiful essays, and stand under the bright lights of her own fabricated victimhood. In my profession, you learn that the best way to deal with a failing structure is not to brace it. You step back, you clear the perimeter, and you let gravity do the work. The living room of our condominium has always been a showcase of Delaney's impeccable taste. It is filled with soft velvet upholstery, imported silk rugs, and carefully curated abstract art. It is a room designed for elegant conversation and polite society. On a quiet Sunday evening, I sat in the center of the deep gray armchair, waiting for her to finish her telephone call in the kitchen. I did not have a briefcase next to me. I did not have a stack of highlighted spreadsheets or manila folders. In my profession, you learn that burying a hostile subject in paperwork only gives them room to argue about the details. If you want to break a fabricated narrative, you bring nothing but the absolute, unadorned truth. Delaney walked into the room, holding a glass of sparkling water. She looked comfortable, draped in an oversized cashmere sweater, entirely confident that her social media performance and her aggressive legal filings had backed me into a corner of silent submission. "We need to have a brief conversation about the logistics of your exit strategy," I said. My voice was at room temperature. It was the exact tone I use when informing a corporate client that their warehouse foundation has failed inspection. She stopped walking. Her grip tightened on her glass. "My exit strategy, Aspen. I do not want to fight with you. I have already made my position clear to the court." "You have made a story clear to the court," I corrected her gently. "But the story has structural flaws. I am only going to give you 3 facts tonight. First, the dissolution documents were not a spontaneous plea for my attention. You printed them from your personal laptop on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 days before you presented them to me." Her eyes widened slightly, but she maintained her posture. "Second," I continued, leaning back into the armchair, "the smart speaker on the kitchen counter was not glitching. I reviewed the cloud access logs. I know you manually activated the microphone." I know you whispered an instruction for it to keep recording as long as it did not cut out in the middle. You were trying to manufacture an incident. Delaney opened her mouth to speak, a defensive rebuttal already forming on her lips, but I did not let her find the breath to voice it. And third, I said, dropping my voice a fraction of an octave, I know about Larkspur Key. I watched the name hit her. It was a physical impact. For a split second, the polished, untouchable director of development vanished. Delaney completely froze. She did not blink. She did not breathe. It was a single, deafening beat of total silence. In the world of forensic auditing, that singular moment of paralyzed shock is infinitely more valuable than a signed confession. She recovered quickly, but the damage to her composure was done. Her face flushed, and she immediately pivoted to the only defense mechanism she had left. She denied the unspoken accusation, completely unprompted. "There is nothing going on with Owen," she snapped, her voice trembling with sudden, sharp anxiety. "He is a colleague. You are paranoid." I had not even mentioned his name. "I am not here to discuss your consultant," I replied, keeping my hands folded calmly in my lap. Delaney realized her mistake and immediately shifted tactics. Her eyes filled with tears, pooling perfectly along her lower lashes. She dropped the aggressive stance and slipped seamlessly back into the role of the victim. "You do not understand what it has been like," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I had to protect myself. You have been a ghost in this house for 12 months. You come home, you stare at your reports, and you look right through me. You are completely devoid of any warmth. I was terrified of what would happen to me when I finally left. I was securing my future because you stopped caring about ours." I looked at her, truly absorbing the magnitude of her rationalization. She genuinely believed her own rhetoric. "A perceived lack of emotional warmth," I said, delivering the words like a scalpel slicing through thin paper, "does not legally justify diverting marital funds into a corporate shell, setting a surveillance trap in your own kitchen, and secretly preparing an alternate life behind your partner's back. You cannot claim self-defense when you are the one who engineered the ambush." The tears instantly vanished from her eyes, replaced by a hot, flashing anger. "You hacked my accounts. You invaded my privacy to find that name. You are sick. Aspen, my lawyers will absolutely destroy you in court for cyberstalking." She was waiting for me to panic, waiting for me to admit I had crossed a legal boundary. But Marisol had prepared me for this exact accusation. "I checked the publicly available state business registry," I answered, my tone flat and unbothered. "And I reviewed the shared financial portals we both legally own. There was no hacking. There was no breach of privacy. You just left your digital footprints in the mud." And I simply looked down. I stood up from the armchair. The conversation was over. I had delivered the necessary payload. I walked down the hallway to our primary bedroom, leaving her standing alone in the center of her perfectly decorated living room. I did not close the door behind me. I pulled a large suitcase from the closet and began transferring my clothes, my toiletries, and my files. I moved with quiet, methodical efficiency. I did not throw anything into the bag. I did not smash framed photographs. I did not slam drawers. I packed my belongings as if I were simply checking out of a hotel. The silence from my end of the hallway was apparently louder than any screaming match could have been. Delaney stood in the doorway, watching me. Her chest was heaving. For the first time since this ordeal began, she looked genuinely terrified. She had spent months preparing for a war with an angry, volatile spouse. She had never prepared to face a woman who was simply, irrevocably finished. She realized, watching me fold my shirts, that she had not just lost control of the narrative, she had lost me entirely. That night, the atmosphere in the condominium fractured. From my new position in the guest bedroom, I could hear the muffled, frantic sounds of Delaney losing her grip. She was pacing the hardwood floors of the living room. I heard the muffled cadence of her voice as she made desperate, hushed phone calls. She was calling Owen over and over again. She was opening and closing doors. Her panic was exactly what we needed. Early the next morning, my phone vibrated on the nightstand, It was an encrypted message from Victor Sloan. When a person is terrified of being caught, they stop acting rationally. They try to hide the evidence by burying it deeper, but moving dirt only creates a bigger pile. Driven by the fear that I was closing in on her hidden assets, Delaney had spent the hours between midnight and 4 in the morning frantically logging into multiple accounts. She had canceled scheduled meetings. She had liquidated small holdings, and most importantly, she had aggressively transferred funds through a series of intermediate digital wallets. Victor's message was brief, but it contained a complete victory. Rushed financial transactions leave massive, glaring anomalies in the banking grid. By panicking and moving the money so violently in the middle of the night, Delaney had accidentally illuminated the exact pathways Victor had been struggling to map. He had followed the fresh digital wake straight to the bottom of the lake. The message contained a single attached document. It was a verified tracking report for a wire transfer. Victor had identified a massive outgoing payment, a sum equivalent to 3 months of premium rent, sent directly to a luxury property management firm located in the downtown district. The payment was coded as a security deposit and first month's rent for a fully furnished, high-end loft. I looked at the execution date on the wire transfer. The money had cleared the bank exactly 5 days before Delaney ever stood up from the dining table to hand me the brown envelope. The lie was completely dismantled. I locked my phone, pulled the blankets back, and stepped out of bed, feeling the cold, solid floor beneath my feet. My Aunt Laurel Ashmore does not believe in the therapeutic power of a warm hug. For 35 years, she worked as a senior clerk in the county probate court system. She spent her entire professional life wading through the bitter, messy aftermath of fractured families fighting over estates, trusts, and hidden assets. She knows that grief is temporary, but a legally binding signature is forever. So, when she drove her heavily dented sedan into Chicago on a rainy Thursday afternoon, she did not bring casseroles or soft words. She brought 3 boxes of heavy-duty expanding file folders, a digital label maker, and a massive thermos of black coffee. She walked into the guest bedroom of the condominium, took one look at the scattered printouts on my makeshift desk, and rolled up the sleeves of her wool sweater. We did not cry together. Instead, we cataloged the wreckage. We worked with the exact same quiet intensity I use when sifting through the charred remains of a commercial fire. You have to understand the fundamental weakness of arrogant people. Aspen, Laurel said, her voice dry and steady as she slapped a neon yellow sticker onto a stack of banking records. They rely entirely on their charm. They think their smile is a cloaking device, but no matter how beautiful a liar is, they always leave behind receipts, records, timestamps, and signatures. You just have to be patient enough to gather the paper. Her words anchored me. The circle of truth was beginning to tighten around Delaney, pulling in pieces of reality she thought she had successfully buried. The next piece of the puzzle arrived courtesy of Tessa. She dropped by the condominium late Friday evening, carrying a cardboard tray of coffees and a hardened expression. She had been asking around the West Loop neighborhood, tapping into the extensive network of tradespeople, leasing agents, and property managers she interacted with daily. I spoke to a leasing agent who manages that high-end loft building downtown, Tessa said, taking a sip of her dark roast. The one Victor tracked the deposit to. The agent remembered them perfectly. Delaney and Owen did not just rent it blindly. They took a private, guided tour of the penthouse units exactly 3 weeks before she handed you those papers. 3 weeks. I processed the timeline. While I had been sitting in a sterile hotel lobby in Nebraska, calculating flood damage, my wife had been measuring the square footage of a secret apartment with another man, planning where they would put their furniture. The logistics of her departure had been fully, meticulously staged, but the facade was beginning to crack on multiple fronts. The next morning, Marisol called me with a development that shifted the battlefield away from my personal life and directly into Delaney's professional domain. I just got off the phone with a young scheduling coordinator at Harrow House, Marisol announced, sounding deeply satisfied. She reached out to me through a secure line. It turns out, she has been losing sleep over some glaring discrepancies in the departmental expense reports. Delaney had been careless. Intoxicated by her own perceived cleverness, she had started using the charity's operating budget to subsidize her hidden life. The young coordinator had noticed a pattern of luxury black car services and boutique hotel room charges being billed to the fund. Delaney had coded them under the umbrella of exclusive donor outreach events. The problem, Marisol explained, is that the coordinator checked the guest lists for those specific nights. There were 0 donors present at those events. They were phantom galas. Delaney was essentially using nonprofit funds to cover her illicit hotel stays with Owen. The professional armor Delaney wore so proudly was rotting from the inside out. Yet, to the outside world, she maintained her performance. She continued to curate her social media presence, posting vague, melancholic updates about the difficult journey of finding oneself after years of emotional starvation. She still had her fierce defenders in the local art scene, people who rushed to the comments section to offer their unwavering support. But people who had known us for a long time were starting to notice the inconsistencies. Her narrative required constant maintenance, and she was beginning to overcompensate. One day she was the terrified victim fleeing a hostile environment. The next day she was the empowered woman reclaiming her independence. The story kept shifting direction, bending to fit whoever she was talking to at that exact moment. I chose not to participate in the public spectacle. I did not post a single rebuttal on social media. I did not call our mutual friends to vent or plead my case. I went to work. I walked the dog. I drank my coffee. My absolute refusal to perform for the crowd created a glaring contrast. The quieter I remained, the louder and more frantic Delaney seemed. To the observant eye, her behavior was rapidly transforming from the authentic grief of a broken heart into the aggressive, calculated campaign of a public relations manager trying to control a scandal. Then, a seemingly insignificant detail completely flipped the script regarding the most emotional piece of leverage she had tried to use against me. In her meticulously drafted separation agreement, Delaney had demanded sole primary custody of Clover. She had always played the role of the devoted dog mother in public, constantly telling our friends how she had single-handedly managed the complex rescue agency paperwork and veterinary registrations. It was a beautiful piece of character building. It was also entirely fabricated. I pulled the original adoption file from the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. Laurel stood over my shoulder as I opened the manila folder. I sifted through the vaccination histories until I found the official microchip registration certificate. "Look at the name on the title line," I told Laurel, pointing to the printed text. It was registered exclusively under Aspen Ashmore. During the hectic week we brought Clover home, Delaney had complained about the tedious administrative portal for the microchip company. She had abandoned the process halfway through to attend a gallery opening. I had quietly logged in, paid the fee, and completed the registration in my name to ensure the dog was safe. Delaney had never bothered to check, assuming her own lies had somehow become reality through sheer repetition. "That custody demand in the papers," Laurel murmured, tapping the certificate with her index finger. "It was completely toothless." "It was not just toothless," I replied, staring at the document. "It was a prop." Everything shifted into a cold, devastating focus. I sat back in my chair, looking at the mountain of evidence Laurel and I had compiled. The bank transfers, the printer logs, the apartment deposit, the fabricated expense reports, the microchip certificate. I finally understood the absolute totality of the illusion. Almost everything Delaney had placed on the dining room table that night was theater. The heavy sigh, the condescending smile, the claim that it was all just a joke. The thick stack of legal papers, the audio recorder listening from the kitchen counter, even the role of the victim she had assumed immediately afterward. None of it was born from a genuine breakdown of our marriage. It was a fully funded, highly coordinated stage play designed to extract maximum capital and sympathy before the curtain dropped. She had built a stunning, complex house of cards, trusting that I would be too blinded by emotional devastation to notice the glue holding it together. But she had forgotten who she married. She had forgotten that I do not look at the paint on the walls. I look at the foundation, and her foundation was entirely made of sand. Mediation rooms are designed to be aggressively neutral. The walls are usually painted a soft beige, the tables are heavy oak, and the chairs are ergonomic but deliberately uncomfortable after an hour. The goal is to force a compromise through sheer, sterile exhaustion. We sat on one side of the long table. Marisol was to my left, perfectly composed in a sharp charcoal suit. Victor Sloane sat to my right, his thick leather briefcase resting on the floor beside him. Across from us sat Delaney and her attorney, a high-priced litigator named Harrison, who specialized in aggressive, high-net-worth divorces. For the first 45 minutes, Delaney played her role with absolute perfection. She sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her shoulders hunched slightly to project vulnerability. Harrison did the talking. He painted a tragic portrait of a woman who had been emotionally starved and financially isolated. He formally submitted her demands for temporary relief. Delaney wanted exclusive use of the condominium. She wanted 60% of the current equity. She demanded a staggering $10,000 a month in temporary spousal support, claiming she had no separate savings and was entirely unprepared for independent living. Finally, Harrison pushed a paper forward demanding immediate, primary custody of Clover, arguing that the dog was Delaney's sole source of emotional stability. She was playing the part of the destitute, discarded wife flawlessly. The mediator, a retired circuit court judge with tired eyes, nodded sympathetically as Harrison concluded his opening remarks. Then, Marisol unclasped her hands and rested them on the table. She did not raise her voice. She did not display a single ounce of outrage. She simply opened her primary binder and began to systematically dismantle the fiction. "We contest the narrative of financial unpreparedness," Marisol stated, sliding a bound packet across the polished wood toward the mediator. "And we firmly object to the request for temporary support. My client's spouse is not a victim of sudden abandonment. She is the architect of a highly calculated, well-funded exit strategy." Marisol did not drop our entire payload. She was a sniper, not a bomber. She released just enough evidence to radically drop the temperature in the room. She presented the incorporation documents for Larkspur Key Limited Liability Company. She produced the wire transfer receipt for the luxury apartment deposit downtown, highlighting the date, which was weeks before the divorce papers were ever served. She submitted the smart speaker cloud logs, proving Delaney had actively orchestrated a surveillance trap in the marital kitchen. I watched Delaney's posture shift. The hunched, vulnerable shoulders suddenly went rigid. Harrison picked up the packet, his eyes darting rapidly across the pages. He had clearly not been informed about the apartment or the LLC. Furthermore, Marisol continued, her voice slicing through the heavy silence, "We have brought in a forensic accountant to trace the exact origins of the funds currently shielding the petitioner. Mr. Sloane, if you would." Victor sat forward, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. He did not look at Delaney. He spoke directly to the mediator. "Over the past 6 months, there has been a systematic diversion of marital assets," Victor explained, his tone completely clinical. "The petitioner engaged in a complex transaction chain to obscure the movement of capital. She utilized a portion of my client's year-end corporate bonus to artificially inflate the balance of their joint checking account. Once that balance was inflated, she initiated a massive withdrawal from the home equity line of credit attached to their primary residence. She then used the bonus funds to immediately pay down the visible balance of that credit line, masking the initial withdrawal. The extracted equity was then funneled through 3 separate intermediary accounts before finally landing in the corporate shell of Larkspur Key." Harrison held up a hand, attempting to halt the momentum. "My client had authorized access to the equity line. Any withdrawal would have required dual signatures. Aspen Ashmore had to have approved the transaction. That brings us to the most concerning piece of data," Victor replied, pulling a single laminated sheet from his folder. "The electronic signature request for that specific equity withdrawal was generated and opened from the internal IP address of the shared condominium on a Tuesday morning. However, it was not completed. It sat idle for 2 days. It was finally forwarded to Aspen's mobile device late Thursday evening. Victor paused, allowing the timeline to hang in the air. According to Granite Vale Response Group deployment records, Marisol interjected smoothly. On that exact Thursday evening, Aspen was standing in the middle of a catastrophic disaster zone in Texas, following a historic hailstorm. She had been awake for over 36 hours assessing structural collapses. The electronic signature request was intentionally delayed and then pushed to her phone at the precise moment she was exhausted, distracted, and incapable of thoroughly reviewing a complex financial document. She saw a notification from her bank, assumed it was a routine account verification, and clicked approve. The petitioner weaponized my client's high-pressure work environment to commit financial fraud. The silence that followed was absolute. The mediator stared at the IP address log, his sympathetic demeanor entirely gone. He was no longer looking at a heartbroken wife. He was looking at a tactician who had committed premeditated financial manipulation. Harrison scrambled to regain footing. These are wild accusations regarding intent. The funds in the LLC were earmarked for independent consulting work. My client is working with an established philanthropic advisor, Owen Kessler, to transition into private consulting. Marisol offered a terrifyingly bright smile. If the funds were strictly for consulting, we would be more than happy to verify that. In fact, if we cannot get a complete, unredacted ledger of every single dollar moving in and out of Larkspur Key by tomorrow morning, we will simply subpoena Owen Kessler to testify under oath regarding his exact relationship with the LLC and the petitioner. Delaney flinched violently. It was the first time she genuinely lost control of her physical reactions in public. She turned to Harrison, her voice a frantic, hushed whisper, but I already knew what Harrison was going to tell her. 2 days prior. The moment Victor began poking around the peripheral accounts associated with the charity, Owen Kessler had immediately retained his own aggressive independent counsel. He had built a wall between himself and Delaney. He was not going to risk his lucrative career or his standing with high-net-worth donors to be dragged into a messy, fraudulent divorce proceeding. He had abandoned her the second the lights came on. The mediator took a deep breath, removed his reading glasses, and folded his hands over the evidence packets. "Counsel," the mediator said, his voice hard and uncompromising. "The landscape of this mediation has fundamentally changed. The request for temporary spousal support is suspended indefinitely pending a complete and total forensic audit of all accounts, including the limited liability company. The request for exclusive possession of the condominium is denied. We are not proceeding with any division of assets or custody discussions regarding the animal until I have a clear, honest accounting of where the money has gone." For the first time since the night in the kitchen, Delaney truly lost her rhythm. The elegant mask shattered. She looked across the table at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and genuine panic. She had expected a chaotic fight. She had expected me to yell, to argue, to beg. She had never expected to be systematically dissected in a quiet, brightly lit room. I sat perfectly straight in my chair. My face remained entirely expressionless. I did not offer her a triumphant smile or a look of vindication. I simply watched the reality of her situation crash down around her. Deep inside, beneath the ribs, a profound sense of clarity settled over me. I remembered the heavy silver pen resting next to my dinner plate. I remembered the scratch of the nib against the thick paper of her fake dissolution documents. Delaney had believed handing me that pen was the final act of her brilliantly written play. But sitting in the mediation room, watching her carefully constructed universe collapse under the weight of hard data, I finally understood the truth. The pen I picked up at the dining table was never a reaction to her trap. It was the opening shot of my war. The collapse of a carefully constructed life does not happen with a cinematic explosion. It happens in mundane, humiliating increments. It is the sound of an email pinging from human resources. It is the heavy silence on the other end of a phone call. For Delaney, the structural failure began at the exact place she derived her power, Harrow House. The board of directors for the Arts Initiative was fiercely protective of its reputation. They relied on the goodwill of billionaires who did not tolerate scandal. Following the young coordinator's initial discovery, the board quietly initiated a comprehensive internal review of the development department. They tried to keep it contained to avoid public embarrassment, but the sheer volume of the discrepancies made discretion impossible. Dozens of invoices for private car services, high-end dinners, and luxury hotel accommodations were cross-referenced against actual donor attendance lists. The math was brutally simple. Thousands of dollars had been funneled into a lifestyle that had absolutely nothing to do with charity. Delaney was placed on administrative leave. Her secure building access was revoked on a Tuesday morning. If she expected Owen to stand beside her as the professional fallout rained down, she vastly overestimated the loyalty of a man who makes his living in the shadows. Owen Kessler was a parasite who thrived on the wealth of others. The moment Marisol threatened to subpoena him, he severed the connection completely. Through the ongoing discovery process, Marisol acquired copies of Delaney's recent text message logs. They painted a pathetic picture. Delaney had sent him paragraphs of frantic, pleading messages. Owen's responses were brief, sterile, and devastatingly cowardly. "Do not drag me into your legal mess," he wrote on a Thursday afternoon. "You need to handle this yourself. I am not ruining my firm over your sloppy divorce." He abandoned her without a second thought, exposing the hollow, transactional nature of the affair she had risked everything for. The social sphere, the arena where Delaney usually reigned supreme, began to turn on her as well. And it was not because I launched a counterattack. I maintained my absolute, suffocating silence. I did not post statements. I did not text our mutual friends with my side of the story. My refusal to perform forced everyone to look exclusively at Delaney, and the longer they looked, the more the cracks showed. Her explanations for our split became erratic. In one conversation, she claimed I was verbally abusive. 2 days later, to a different friend, she said we simply grew apart due to my demanding travel schedule. A lie only works if it is consistent. Her narrative was shifting wildly to accommodate the new leaks about her suspension from Harrow House. People who had fiercely defended her a month ago simply stopped returning her calls. It was in the middle of this rapid descent that she asked to meet me. She sent a short email asking for 30 minutes at a quiet, dimly lit coffee shop on the edge of the North Side. I agreed. I did not bring Marisol. I did not bring Victor. I went alone, driven by a morbid curiosity to see what was left of the woman I had married. When I walked into the cafe, she was sitting in a corner booth, staring into a mug of black tea. She looked genuinely exhausted. The glossy, magazine-perfect armor was gone. Her skin was pale, and the dark circles under her eyes could not be hidden by expensive makeup. When she looked up at me, her eyes immediately filled with tears. "Aspen," she whispered, her voice cracking in a way that could not be rehearsed. "I am so tired." This has all gone completely out of control. For one brief, agonizing fraction of a second, the years folded back. I looked across the small wooden table and saw the real Delaney. I saw the woman I had fallen in love with nearly a decade ago. I saw the woman who used to laugh with her entire face, not the strategic, calculated smile she had adopted for the donors. The vulnerability in her eyes in that specific moment was not a tactic. It was raw, bleeding reality. She was drowning, and she knew it. I felt a sharp, heavy ache in my chest. I opened my mouth, a sliver of genuine empathy rising to the surface. Then, she wiped her eyes with a paper napkin and leaned slightly across the table. "Please," she said, lowering her voice, "can we just make this stop? I will drop the request for the condominium. I will withdraw the petition for spousal support. But you have to tell Marisol to let the LLC go. If you keep digging into Larkspur Key, the board at Harrow House is going to press criminal charges for embezzlement. Just let the shell company go, Aspen, and we can settle everything else quietly." The ghost of the woman I loved vanished instantly, replaced once again by the cornered tactician. The genuine moment died right there on the table, suffocated by her own self-interest. She had not asked me to meet because she was consumed by guilt. She was not crying because she mourned the death of our 8-year marriage. She was crying because she was about to face felony fraud charges, and she needed me to close the audit. Her apology was not an act of repentance. It was a plea bargain. It was a business negotiation disguised as a breakdown. I looked at her, the empathy draining out of me like water from a cracked glass. "You built the trap, Delaney," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet heavy with absolute finality. "I am just the one who locked the door." I stood up, left a $5 bill on the table for my untouched coffee, and walked out into the cold afternoon air without looking back. The next morning, Marisol formally submitted our final settlement offer to Harrison. The terms were brutally fair and completely non-negotiable. We demanded complete, unredacted financial transparency regarding every single dollar funneled into Larkspur Key. We demanded an immediate, legally binding cessation of all public smearing and social media commentary. We offered a strict 50-50 split of all legitimate marital assets, exactly as the law intended, and demanded a permanent end to the exhausting public relations war she was trying to wage. We were giving her a chance to walk away with half of what we actually built together, provided she surrendered the stolen funds. 48 hours later, Harrison called Marisol with their response. Delaney refused the offer. Even after losing her job, losing her partner in crime, and losing the blind faith of her social circle, she could not accept defeat on paper. Her ego was too massive, too heavily insulated by years of manipulating everyone around her. She still firmly believed that when we finally stepped into the courtroom for the final hearing, her physical beauty, her perfectly timed tears, and her practiced eloquence would somehow cast a spell over the judge. She truly believed her charm could defeat a forensic audit. She chose to take the lie all the way to the end. The human brain is remarkably adaptable to trauma, but there is a distinct and quiet danger in allowing a single catastrophic event to become your permanent identity. I woke up on a crisp Tuesday morning and realized I was standing on the edge of that exact precipice. If I allowed the memory of that rigged dining room table to consume my focus, Delaney would remain the author of my defining chapter forever. I refused to grant her that power. I realized I did not want to spend the rest of my life being the woman who survived a fraudulent divorce. I needed to become the woman who built something new. For nearly 5 years, I had entertained a quiet, persistent daydream about owning a piece of land near the water. It was an idea I had constantly pushed away, deferring it indefinitely because Delaney preferred the sterile, manicured luxury of high-rise city living. She hated dirt, she hated isolation, and she hated anything that could not be photographed for a social charity profile. But I no longer needed to compromise. I called Tessa, packed a heavy canvas duffel bag, and put Clover in the back seat of my vehicle. We drove for 3 hours out of the city, heading straight toward the eastern shore of Lake Michigan. Tessa drove her heavy-duty work truck, keeping the radio volume low while I navigated us down a winding, unpaved coastal road. We pulled into the gravel driveway of a neglected, weather-beaten cottage sitting on a half-acre lot wrapped in towering, overgrown pine trees. The exterior paint was peeling in large gray strips, and the wooden front porch sagged heavily to the left. To an ordinary buyer seeking a vacation home, it was a complete teardown. To Tessa and me, it was a structural puzzle waiting to be solved. Tessa walked through the dusty, empty rooms, her heavy boots echoing sharply against the warped hardwood floors. She did not offer me empty emotional encouragement. She offered hard, actionable data. She ran her hands along the exposed wooden beams spanning the living room ceiling, checked the physical integrity of the roof tiles from the backyard, and inspected the outdated electrical wiring panel hidden in the damp basement. "The fundamental bones are solid, aspen," Tessa said, wiping decades of dust from her hands onto her denim jeans. "But you are going to need a complete electrical rewire, brand new plumbing drops in the kitchen and bathroom, and probably a complete structural reinforcement on the load-bearing wall facing the lake. You are looking at 90 days of rough framing and permitting before we can even think about hanging drywall. It is a massive project." I stood in the center of the decaying living room. I looked past the crumbling plaster and the broken window frames, focusing entirely on the magnificent, unobstructed view of the steel-gray water churning outside. "Give me a complete timeline and a raw materials estimate by Friday," I replied. In that exact moment, the abstract fantasy solidified into a spreadsheet of actionable tasks. The dream became logistics, and I excel at logistics. Returning to Chicago, my professional rhythm at Granite Vale Response Group shifted dramatically. I was assigned to lead a massive commercial loss audit following a severe, unseasonal freeze in the northern suburbs that had burst heavy industrial pipes across 7 different retail complexes. I managed a team of 12 junior auditors, spending 12 hours a day walking through flooded showrooms and calculating complex depreciation schedules. Previously, I had buried myself in these damage assessments as a mechanism to escape the crushing isolation of my condominium. But walking through a ruined shopping center this time, identifying over $4 million in legitimate structural damage, I felt an entirely different sensation in my chest. My mind was perfectly clear. I was no longer using other people's physical disasters to numb my own emotional pain. I was operating at peak efficiency because I was finally working to fund my own future. I was gathering capital to build my own walls, instead of frantically trying to repair a marriage that had already been intentionally demolished. Aunt Laurel called me every Sunday evening to check my emotional temperature. During one of those calls, as I was sorting through a thick stack of Marisol's legal filings, Laurel offered a piece of pragmatic wisdom that anchored me completely. "Do not let the final judgment define your worth." "Aspen," Laurel told me over the phone, her voice carrying the absolute certainty of a woman who had spent 35 years watching people fight over money. "A court of law only possesses the jurisdiction to divide your physical assets. A judge can split your retirement accounts and assign a numerical value to your real estate. But no judge on earth, and certainly no ex-wife, has the power to determine the value of the life you are going to build after you walk out of that building." Her words resonated deeply. Every night, the condominium felt less like a battleground and more like a temporary waiting room. I would spread the architectural blueprints for the Michigan cottage across the marble kitchen island, placing Marisol's heavily redacted legal discovery folders right next to them. Clover would curl up under the counter, resting her heavy golden head across my feet. It was a very small, quiet piece, but it was absolutely unbreakable. The dog knew the war in the house was ending. Meanwhile, the artificial universe Delaney had constructed was rapidly suffocating her. Her short-term luxury apartment lease, paid for with the stolen marital funds, was rapidly approaching its expiration date in less than 14 days. Without her lucrative salary from the Harrow House Arts Initiative, and with her social capital thoroughly bankrupt, she was financially marooned. Owen Kessler remained a total ghost, completely ignoring her existence to protect his own corporate standing. The polished, tragic image of the brave woman walking away from a freezing marriage had lost all of its leverage. Society only tolerates a victim narrative until the financial receipts prove otherwise. And her receipts were entirely fraudulent. She was gasping for air in a vacuum she had created. The mounting pressure manifested in desperate, late-night digital outbursts. At 2 a.m. on a Thursday, my phone vibrated with a series of text messages from her number. "I hope you are happy with what you have done." The first message read, "You have completely destroyed my career and alienated all of our friends. You took a private marital issue and turned paperwork into a weapon against me. You are exactly the cold, calculating monster I told everyone you were." I sat in the dark guest bedroom and stared at the glowing screen. The absolute audacity of her accusation was almost artistic in its delusion. She was actively blaming me for weaponizing documents, conveniently ignoring the undisputed fact that she was the one who had literally drafted a 20-page legal ambush, printed it, and handed it to me across our dining table. She had brought the gun into our home. She was just furious that I was the one who expertly unloaded it. I did not type a reply. I did not justify her delusion with a response. I simply turned the phone face down on the nightstand and went to sleep. The next afternoon, I drove to a title company office in the downtown district. I sat across from a closing agent and reviewed the final purchase contract for the lake cottage in Michigan. When the agent handed me a heavy brass pen, I took it without a single tremor of hesitation. I pressed the dark ink to the thick paper and signed my name on the dotted line. My hand was just as steady, just as cold, and just as precise as it had been on the night Delaney served me the divorce papers. The physical motion was identical, but the meaning had entirely shifted. The first signature had ended a miserable, toxic performance. This signature was starting a life that actually belonged to me. A week later, the morning of the final court hearing arrived. I put on a tailored navy suit. I drank a single cup of black coffee. I walked out of the condominium, locked the door, and took a cab to the family courthouse. Walking up the wide concrete steps beside Marisol and Victor, I felt an overwhelming sense of lightness in my chest. I was no longer a woman desperately searching for a miracle to save a doomed relationship. I was not looking for an emotional apology, and I was certainly not looking for dramatic revenge. I was simply a woman walking into a room to collect my undeniable truth, reclaim my stolen capital, and permanently close the final door on the past. Family courtrooms do not look like the ones on television. There are no dramatic gasps from a crowded gallery, no surprise witnesses bursting through oak double doors. There is only the hum of the air conditioning, the rustle of heavy paper, and the sterile smell of floor wax. We sat at the petitioner table. Delaney sat across from us, wearing a pale gray silk blouse that made her look perfectly fragile. Even now, at the absolute end of the line, she refused to drop the character. When the judge asked her to speak, Delaney folded her hands, looked down at her lap, and delivered her final monologue. She claimed the brown envelope on the dining table had been a desperate, stupid mistake. She said it was a misguided cry for help from a woman suffocating in a frozen marriage. She looked directly at the judge and accused me of taking a normal marital crisis and escalating it into a scorched earth legal war. According to her, I was the one who had weaponized a moment of weakness. When she finished, she wiped a single tear from her cheek. It was a beautiful performance, but Marisol did not argue with emotion. When it was her turn to speak, she simply stood up, adjusted her suit jacket, and began laying down the bricks of reality in an unbreakable chronological order. She did not raise her voice. She let the timeline do the screaming. "Your Honor," Marisol began, handing a thick-bound folder to the bailiff. "The petitioner claims this was a spontaneous act of marital frustration. The evidence proves it was a 5-month corporate exit strategy. In month 1, she secured high-level legal counsel. In month 2, she illegally downloaded my client's restricted corporate asset data. In month 3, she registered a hidden limited liability company. 2 weeks before the supposed spontaneous incident, she wired a massive security deposit for a luxury downtown apartment. And exactly 2 days before the dinner in question, she printed a 20-page, heavily researched dissolution document from her personal laptop." Marisol paused, letting the sheer weight of the premeditation settle over the bench. "Finally," Marisol continued, "on the night of the dinner, she did not just present the papers, she set a surveillance trap." Marisol pressed a button on her laptop. The audio file we had extracted from the kitchen smart speaker filled the quiet courtroom. First, the rustling of fabric. Then, the undeniable, hushed whisper of my wife's voice, captured just seconds before I walked into the room. "If she explodes, tonight is it." The audio echoed off the wood-paneled walls and died. The silence that followed was suffocating. The entire room instantly understood the truth. The objective of that evening was never communication. It was provocation. She had pushed the papers across the table, hoping I would lose my mind so she could record it and use my reaction to justify stealing our shared assets. Victor Sloan took the stand next. He did not use complicated financial jargon. He spoke to the judge like a teacher explaining basic addition. He traced the exact flow of cash from our joint home equity line, through the temporary holding accounts, straight into the hidden corporate shell. He proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the financial self-protection Delaney kept crying about was actually a systematic dissipation of marital assets committed in secret, long before the divorce was ever made public. The final nail in the coffin came from the one person Delaney thought would save her. Owen Kessler did not even bother to show up. To ensure he was not dragged onto the witness stand and cross-examined about his own questionable ethics, his independent attorney submitted a sworn affidavit confirming key dates. The affidavit verified that Owen had indeed toured the downtown rental properties with Delaney exactly 3 weeks before the incident. By desperately trying to protect himself, Owen inadvertently tightened the noose of evidence perfectly around Delaney's neck. Her entire timeline of being a suddenly abandoned, terrified spouse was completely incinerated by the man she had planned to run away with. The judge did not deliberate for long. The final ruling was a comprehensive, devastating sweep in my favor, because Delaney was found to have actively hidden assets and manipulated the legal process in bad faith. She lost almost every single demand she had made. Her request for ongoing financial support was entirely denied. I was granted full and uncontested ownership of Clover. The final division of our physical property was heavily adjusted in my favor to penalize her for the stolen funds, and the judge ordered her to reimburse me for a massive 65% of my legal fees. The beautiful, untouchable director of development had walked into the courtroom expecting a payout. She walked out with absolutely nothing but the clothes on her back and a heavily tarnished reputation. We exited the heavy double doors into the wide marble hallway of the courthouse. I was walking toward the elevators when I heard her footsteps behind me. I stopped and turned around. Delaney looked entirely broken. The calculated grace was completely gone. Her hands were shaking as she clutched her leather purse. "I never thought you would go this far," she choked out, her voice raw and jagged. "I never thought you had this in you." I looked at the woman I had spent almost a decade of my life with. I did not feel anger anymore. I did not feel sadness. I felt nothing but the clean, empty space of a closed file. "You mistook my silence for weakness," I replied softly. I turned around, stepped into the elevator, and let the steel doors close between us forever. The final scene of this chapter did not take place in a courtroom or a luxury condominium in the city. It took place 2 weeks later, standing in the middle of a dusty, stripped-down living room on the eastern shore of Lake Michigan. I walked across the bare wooden floorboards of the cottage and pushed the heavy glass windows wide open. A freezing, sharp blast of autumn wind swept off the dark water and rushed into the room, carrying the scent of pine needles and fresh rain. It was brutally cold, and it felt absolutely incredible. Tessa had left a stack of construction permits and raw material invoices on a makeshift plywood table in the center of the room. Clover was asleep on a thick wool blanket by the fireplace, completely exhausted from running through the tall grass all morning. I walked over to the plywood table. I pulled my heavy silver pen from my coat pocket. I uncapped it and placed the metal nib against the rough paper of the first renovation contract. I pressed down, feeling the steady, solid scratch of the ink forming my name. I realized, in that quiet, freezing room, the absolute difference between the two most important documents I had ever signed. The signature I gave at that marble dining table so many months ago was the end of a long, miserable performance. But the signature I laid down today was the beginning of a life that finally, truly belonged to me. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. Please let me know where you are listening from in the comments below so we can connect and share our thoughts together. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to the Amelia Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and show your support by hitting the hype button so that the story in this video can be heard by many more people.